I'm going to call this Lake County 911 Program Review Committee to order. It's Thursday, May 22nd at 10 a.m. I'm going to take a roll call. Commissioner Ragovich here. Sheriff Lane Bruno.
Here.
Mr. Carr. Here. Mr. Filipiak. Mr. Hillier.
Present.
And Mr. McIntosh.
Present.
Okay, I want to start by some opening remarks. First of all, at last meeting I made a joke. I didn't mean it to offend any city. It was actually a joke against Mr. Hillier, who is a former councilman in Eastlake and a retired Navy sailor. So that's where my joke was landed. I'm sorry if it was taken the wrong way. I respect all the cities here in Lake County, and I think we're all doing a fantastic job. So I wanted to clear that up. I also want to start out by saying, with some of the feedback I've had over the week, is this committee exists because of the state required it. They dictated who's on this committee by state law, and we had to put that together. We were supposed to have this stuff buttoned up about a year ago, and we're way behind the mark. Again, we're the last county in Ohio that has to submit our plan. So the things we put on for our plan here will go to each city, each municipality or wherever, and has to vote on county-wide and get 60% of the vote in order to move forward. So I just wanted to make that clear that this isn't something we put together just to look at this. This is required statewide. So with that being said, we're going to have an update. We had some questions on last meeting that the board committee decided they wanted some answers on, and Captain Baknicki was able to track some of that down. So I'm going to hand it over to Captain Baknicki and go from there.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think the main question that came up last time was the PSAP versus dispatch center and kind of the governance and the overrule that we have in regards to both. So and this is according to the state, when I called down there and talked to them, if you're a PSAP, you fall under the rules and you're subjected to being in compliance with all the rules, all the training, all the mandates that are in the ORC. If you are a dispatch center, if a call is transferred to you, you don't actually answer the primary call, and you are still connected and still available to have the EZNet, but you're not a PSAP, you don't have the geo-fenced area you don't fall under the same rules as the PSAPs do. There's the inspections don't happen. The coordinator doesn't go out and look at everything that you're doing, and training requirements aren't necessarily required for that dispatch center because any of the EMD or any of the other stuff is going to be handled at the center that actually handles the call, the PSAP center that handles the call. So then we got, I guess the second question.
Just to clear that,
Yeah.
Kevin, so that means that call center will have to be in the geofence of the main PSAP.
Correct, yeah, that area would be mapped out through the state as part of the PSAP that they're a part of. And then the calls would be transferred out to them. And then we talked a little bit about primary versus secondary PSAP and some of the language that was in the older plans. Basically, with the next gen, PSAPs are PSAPs. If you're a PSAP and you're geo-fenced in and you're answering the 911 calls in that area, you are a PSAP. The secondary PSAP is more or less used in terminology for the rollovers, for the backups of one PSAP to another PSAP. So that's where the secondary versus primary will come in, and as to who is answering the 911 calls and who's available for them.
in all, whether you're a PSAP or a call center, you'll have to have the ability to get on the IZZYnet and be able to take the, have the software and all those things in order to communicate back and forth. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's our absolute goal, I think, with the committee, is to ensure, even if you're not a PSAP, you're not answering the calls that are in your geofence, that you still have the ability to get the metadata transferred to you and have some sort of a connection to the IZZYnet.
Okay, so I thought we would kind of move forward to get this thing moving and go one by one with what we kind of want to see, and I'm going to say page 24. I have a number of them we put up there, we can put up, and I think I've asked Captain Becknicky to put it on a PowerPoint. And we're going to go through and discuss it. We're actually going to take a motion and a second, discuss it, and vote whether we want that on page 24 or not, or if we want to change that. Does that sound good with the board? Okay. So I don't know if you want to start, Dan, with...
Yeah, so basically what I did is that, obviously listening to the committee and hearing the points that were brought up, I made a list of everything that I was taking down that you guys were making points of that were important for the committee and for the county to make sure that all these rules are in the final plan. So I was, and again, we got 6 bullet points that I put in here based on the conversations that you gentlemen had, and worded it. Hopefully you can read that accordingly. The font's a little small.
Can you blow it up just a bit? See how it's done?
Jeez, John.
I left my other glasses in the car intentionally thinking I didn't need them, so.
Let me see what I can do.
Yeah, there you go, that's what I'm looking for.
Is that tickling you, Chad?
That's awesome, thank you. I always say it.
All right. So Commissioner, I mean, if you want to start at the top one, I mean, I can read it off, or people can
Sure.
read it as it's typed. And again, these are things that you guys had talked about that I put into page 24 on your behalf. First one is a minimum of 2 telecommunicators to meet the minimum training standards set forth in OAC 5507-107 must be on duty and available to receive and process calls at all times for any PSAP operating within Lake County, Ohio.
Can I have a motion and second? Motion by
I'll second that.
discussion. Are we all in agreement there? Do we want to talk?
I mean, we've talked at length about the 2, and I think that is, I haven't wavered in that. I agree. I think it's important, but I don't know. We're going to take these one at a time, or can we sort of go through all of them and then discuss and vote, or how do you want to?
I think if we clarify each one, then
Well, because I guess my
we
thinking
could
is,
add more.
I have a couple questions that might be some of the other points that were on there as far as how to do it, so I'm a little hesitant to adopt, just kind of without looking, if we could do a quick overview.
So just this would be just a motion to put it on page 24.
Okay, oh, so we're just, not the plan,
It's
so.
not the overall. So
Okay.
then at the end of page 24, we'll make a motion and to put it to the city, to the.
So if something comes up later and we don't like the way it's at, we can sort of come back and re-talk about it?
Good.
Since Mr. Filipiak walked in just now, do we want to get him up to speed? We're not far, so we shouldn't take much.
So we are, Ken, going through essentially what we would like to see added to page 24. This is something we worked on this week. You may have more, but we thought to keep things moving, we'll make a motion to add these to page 24 as we come through, it was point by point to keep things moving and discuss as we go. I don't know if you have any objection to that, or, and we're on the first one, so. And we're on the first one. So, again, the first one's a minimum of 2 trained dispatchers at each PSAP location. So,
Mr. Chairman, question?
yes,
So that one details specifically with staffing levels, but in order for it to be a PSAP, you have to meet all the requirements. So should that reflect just meet all the requirements, or do you want to specifically
So
address staffing?
I think what's implied is it meets all the requirements that the state already mandates. And page 24, Nina, if you could, if I say this wrong, please correct me. So page 24 is what we're going to add to that just for Lake County. So,
Okay,
and so this is, how we customize it to our area apparently. But, this is, both in the administrative code and the ORC. So they both deal with different things. And I think the last meeting we talked about both of those. And some things we cited were off the administrative code, some were off the ORC. And so.
all right, so let me add, and I know besides the discussion of eliminating PSAPs, which the very first meeting we had, that was suggested was an option of the, or whether there was or wasn't, but that was discussed as a possible option this committee had. This particular item of staffing has been the most discussed, debated, probably thought about across. The captain, he's sitting in the same spot from Wickliffe, who was here last month, raised a good point about Wickliffe and Willowick and being together, and gave that one a lot of thought. Ultimately, I've defaulted on that we need, if you want to be a PSAP, we need to meet the state minimum requirements. I realize that's going to cost some extra revenue to the communities, but I am not in support of eliminating PSAPs. If we get to that point, if it's even on there, probably not, but I'm not in support of that, and I don't think anybody really is at this point. But speaking for myself, so I think through some compromise and just being, if the state set out the minimum standard that there's 2, they gave a good reason for it. And my position would be to support the state's decision to make the minimum staffing 2 for any PSAP.
Yeah, and just to be clear, that I think, and I'll speak for myself, but I think I'd have echo, we're not saying that any community can't be a PSAP. I think that's up to the community. If that's something they feel strongly about and want to have, that's up to them. These are just kind of the guidelines they have to follow to be that PSAP. So from day one, it wasn't my intent to dictate how many PSAPs we're going to have in Lake County. It's going to happen the way it happens. This board has to meet once a year. We can meet more than that. I've gotten Cuyahoga's plan with 23 PSAPs, I think they have, and they meet 6 times a year. I've gotten Geauga's and Ashtabula's, they have 1 PSAP each. It's real simple for them. So it's kind of a, we're that somewhere fall in the middle of that. So, and the question that from Wickliffe last week, there's absolutely ability to do that, I believe, is to make the geofence, make it part of Wickliffe and Willowick. And then you can have 2 dispatch centers, but they're going to have a minimum number between the 2 centers. One could be a call center, and they would back each other up, but they would just have to pick a backup to that center, to that geofence, for whether it's Willoughby or Central, so that they can call, but they're going to take calls from Wickliffe and Willowick. So that's a possibility.
So I have a question to that point. So when we talk about 2 in the PSAPs, everybody's talking about being an answering point. So Wickliffe and Willowick would be, they'd be geofenced, they're getting their calls directly, and the staffing. If that is the case, then I am in agreement with what you're saying.
So if you made Wickliffe, Willowick, oh, I'm sorry, you're going to speak there?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead. I have a point of clarification I'd like to add after you make your comments.
Okay, so if the geofence is around Wickliffe and Willowick together, one of them becomes the PSAP, the other one is not a PSAP.
It's just a call center, or they would, I don't know how you would technically say, is it a PSAP if you have two different buildings?
Well,
If you have the
if they
ability
both-
to do both?
If they both want to be PSAPs, then they both have to have two, correct?
Right, so the standard in the Ohio Administrative Code is that a minimum of 2 telecommunicators must be on duty and available to receive and process calls at all times. However, it also says in that code section that for 911 systems that do have an automatic rollover to a secondary PSAP, then the secondary PSAP can also fulfill that obligation. So you can meet that minimum of 2 telecommunicators staffing requirement between the primary as long as there is an automatic rollover to a secondary, and then that you can fulfill that. The Ohio Revised Code also includes an exception that specifically states that a PSAP may be deemed compliant with the rules for minimum staffing standards if it can demonstrate compliance with all other rules for operational standards. So the reason why you would want to put this additional requirement into page 24 of the final plan is because if that's what the committee wanted to do, is because there are exceptions that are provided for. So that's really the question for this committee. Are you comfortable with what the Ohio Administrative Code and the Ohio Revised Code state with regard to how the minimum staffing requirements can be met? Or do you want to impose something that's more stringent upon the PSAPs? And then just with regard to this conversation about the primary PSAP and the secondary PSAP, those are PSAPs that are required to comply with all the technical requirements. But what you can also have, what we're calling a dispatch center, in the Ohio code sections, it's referred to as an emergency service provider. So that's if you have a PSAP that's directly receiving that 911 call, and then it transfers it to an emergency service provider. That's your local dispatch center that's not considered to be a PSAP under the rules, but still can receive the call in order to then dispatch the appropriate emergency service provider. So hopefully that provides some clarity on the issue.
So I guess back to clarify the point of what we're talking about, are we talking about each entity remaining a PSAP, or is there anybody, as we go down this path, are we talking about separating that out and saying, hey, there's a PSAP here, and there'll be a secondary, what did you call it? The emergency service provider, as
That's
opposed
the
to a PSAP, the non-PSAP, or are we talking about everybody continuing to be a PSAP?
I believe everybody's continuing at this point to be a PSAP.
So, and in that case, and I know it was sent out.
Except Madison Township,
Right,
who will
okay.
be the receiver.
So, excluding Madison, and in the plan that was originally drafted in '88, that was sent out yesterday, it was updated in '20. There's a couple tables in there that show a flow, but it's not very where there's primaries and secondaries. So what we're talking about here is a community saying, hey, we'll be a rollover backup for one, in the case we are talking about Willowick and Wickliffe being able to support. So in a combination, you could have a collective amount of staffing, and we would be okay with a particular level. Or that's what we're here to talk about, is what that level would be. If they had this arrangement which allows for exception to the two.
Do we want to make, with the state suggestion, more robust apparently?
Yeah.
Can I ask a question on this? We've talked a lot about it, and that explanation was really helpful and good. Thank you. Putting this in on page 24 takes it a level higher, right? It says we want what the revised code says, plus a little bit more for Lake County. And we spent a lot of time talking about, wanting the highest standards in this county. I'm thinking, could we not just do our final plan to the Ohio Revised Code, period, the way it is? And we're going to meet again in a year to review this plan, right? And keep an eye on this, and if over the course of the first year we feel like there's a little higher standard we could do, couldn't we add this in a year from now? And change it to say we need to up it to a minimum of 2?
I think the problem with that is that this plan essentially is aspirational, because we're not going to implement this stuff immediately anyway. It's working toward that next gen step that we're trying to achieve. So it may
So
be.
maybe it's not next year, maybe it's 2 years or 3 years. But my point is, there's a lot we don't know about the execution, and I'm not. And initially, I was thinking, absolutely, we should have a minimum of 2 and have the highest standard in our county. But after what Nina just read off, and the code and there was a lot of time put into the Ohio Revised Code. I'm personally thinking, why don't we just adhere to the Ohio Revised Code and know that we can always enhance it later?
Compliance is it 2030? Is it
What do you mean?
that, so is it a 5 years before we have to comply with?
Oh, for everybody to switch to
Yeah.
next gen? Yeah, it's 5 years from, what's the date that the state switches over to the system? So I'm not sure exactly, but we have 5 years to comply from that half was.
More discussion on this.
Do we interpret that section as the rollover to a PSAP that then has 2, or is that 1 and 1?
I think you could read it either way, but I think it makes the most sense to read it to mean that if you have one telecommunicator at the primary PSAP and one at the secondary PSAP, that you can be covered through that. But I would agree that the way it's written is a little bit vague, and you could probably read it either way.
Because if you have one that rolls over for whatever reason, they're overwhelmed, they're out of service, now you still have one
Right.
taking care of now 2 communities, potentially or likely, which again, probably isn't the best
Right.
standard to try to achieve. So if we're going to land on relying on that rollover secondary, in my opinion, it would have to be a PSAP that would have at least 2 telecommunicators on duty at all times.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think in a situation, I mean, the way have been thinking about this would be, you've got 2 is the requirement, but then somebody's gonna fall short, and as we've been told, there's periods of time. But if the primary were still staffed at the 2 and there was a net 3 between the 2, we'd be comfortable. Would seem
Right.
like an adequate level of staffing, because they're defined as their rollovers working and all of that stuff. Then you still have fairly adequate coverage. I wouldn't be in favor of what you just laid out. I agree. That's a little thin.
That leaves it up to that community to decide what sort of relationships they want to work out with other PSAP providers. Second question on that, as it relates to 5507 and the interpretation, are not all of these PSAPs still, well, we call them PSAPs, but I think with this question of definition came up at our last meeting, are not these call centers also still taking direct 911 calls through landlines? Or no?
I believe all the non-emergency.
Just non-emergency?
I believe.
That's true, Sheriff?
No.
Under the next gen rules, all
Still taking the landline, aren't they?
all landlines and all cell phones in the geofenced area would go to that PSAP.
So
Currently,
they're
currently
taking landline
Central is
calls.
taking 911 calls from cell phones. A landline,
Goes directly-
hardline phone goes directly to that police station, that
So-
dispatch center.
So you're saying that's gonna change?
That will change under the new rules.
Does everybody understand that in the room? You're not gonna be getting landline calls then if you're not a primary call recipient? Because I don't think.
I get,
Because I don't think
if I
we
could,
talked about that up to this point.
in response to Councilman Carr, this is an unfunded mandate. And as law enforcement agencies, we get unfunded mandates, not every day, but CCW, sexual predators, you figure it out, we're not giving you any money. And then they, to me, often give you muddy language that you have to figure out, and that's why we have a prosecutor. And we come to you with a lot of muddy language. I think the whole purpose of having these plans in, the next gen 911 plan, is so everybody knows the requirements, so they can plan over the next 2 or 3 or 5 years what they're going to have to meet the standards to turn on Next Gen 911 and begin accepting those calls. So I think that's why it's important that this committee define what exactly those rules are and not 2 years down the line pop in a new rule. Now, if we see 2 years down the line, it doesn't make sense, we can always change that. But I think you have to look at, from this perspective in time, our best interpretation of where we need to go. This is what this committee believes must be defined for our Next Gen 911 plan. I guess that's my view on it.
I think that's exactly right.
Any further?
I would just agree as well. I think that my opinion is that's been the spirit of the conversation in every meeting so far, is talking about the standards and meeting them and discussing how important it is that we maintain a high standard of service in Lake County. So I don't find that to be, I think to your earlier comments about anything out of the blue, it's consistent with what we've been saying for months now.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
So for clarification purposes on my end, because I'm a little slower, I think, than the rest, I'm good with that. We're saying the two that are written, if they want to be a PSAP, but in the case of a community, two communities that wanted to work together, they could run a geofence around them, and then legally they could do two? But there would only be one
That's
PSAP.
Technically one
They would
PSAP.
have to merge those two.
I think what I heard was that these communities, as they stand, would be their own, but they would have, there wouldn't be a they would each have their own geofence, but they'd have rollover. So when one community is on the phone and busy and can't take the call, after so many rings, it's going to roll over to the other community, and those backup dispatchers and phone PSAP answers will be able to pick up the call. They're all standalone, but they have that interrelationship through rollover, right? Is that what we're saying?
So there's one PSAP, and you're gonna have, so let's say one of the buildings isn't big enough or have the accommodation to put 6 people in one room but both cities right now have the ability to have 2 units here and 2 units there, that they're gonna take calls as they come. It's gonna go to the next available line, no matter if you're sitting in this building or that building. So you're gonna get calls from 2 different cities.
So community A and B are sort of working together to have one area. They're handling all the
Yeah.
primary answering. They're dispatching together. It's a cooperative effort. Now, would one of them be not the primary, like one wouldn't be a PSAP, they'd just be a delivery point, like Nina said, just a dispatch?
Yeah, that would be one. I mean, if they started out as each being a PSAP, they would have their own community, their own geofence. There would be two PSAPs, which, if we're going off the requirements that you guys had laid out, then there would be 2 dispatchers each. If they combined into one PSAP, then that rule would apply to just the one PSAP. However, they did the transfers over, if there was an EZNet connection similar to the Madison idea, they can certainly transfer calls to the other center and work as that. And if there was another dispatcher on, they're above and beyond the requirements. But it would be one PSAP, one geofence around both communities.
In that case, one of them would be considered the sole PSAP, with the other having a backup function, then they'd be able to
Yeah,
take
I mean, if you
calls?
want to use the secondary PSAP, you could. I mean, that's just a backup unit, but it's not a PSAP. At that point, it becomes an emergency center, a dispatch center. It has the ability to have a call transferred from Wickliffe, Wilwick, if that's who we're speaking of, over to the other center for them to dispatch their police or fire units, but they would not initially handle the call unless it rolled over.
Or can I ask a question? Are you talking about essentially one PSAP but just housed in 2 different locations? Is that what
Correct.
we're really talking about? Which I think you probably could do. I don't think there's anything that mandates that all of your PSAP telecommunicators are residing in one
One building.
facility. I think there's flexibility. So I guess that's really the question, if that's what you're talking about. Is it one PSAP just hosted at 2 different facilities?
And in that case, both would be PSAPs, and they would be held to the state
It would-
standards.
I mean, I guess for our definition, we're calling it one PSAP because it's gonna have one geofence.
But the equipment housed in both locations would still be held to that standard, the next
Yeah,
gen.
no matter what we're talking about, the technology has to be up to date. It has to be the next gen 911
Okay.
software and all that. So that they're able to take
That's,
the
that
videos,
would be
the
the
text,
most,
all that stuff.
that's the most important part of it in my mind. is that
Correct.
we're-
And I'm not aware of any community that doesn't have that. You know, if they don't plan on getting it, they already have that software and some training and stuff.
Trying to sort this out, so let's just put names on it, Wickliffe, Wilwick, because you also have Mentor on the Lake to deal with, same sort of issue. They don't have a community right next door, small like them. So Wickliffe, Wilwick, under this discussion, there's one, they can both be their own PSAP, so they choose. Great, okay, they meet all the requirements, they have 2 and 2, and they meet the requirements. However, and just looking at the square footage, so I was thinking about Willoughby. Willoughby's 10.3 square miles. You combine Wickliffe and Wilwick, you got 7.2. So they're 30% smaller than the city of Willoughby, which has 2. If they wanted to work out something together, one of those 2 would be considered the primary, correct? The other one is a dispatch center, but then aren't all the calls routed directly to the primary? They don't go to, so if, for example, Wickliffe was going to be the PSAP, just for the sake of discussion, putting a name on it. Willowick still wants their dispatch center, and we met with the chiefs, and we understand why. They made some very valid points in all those communities. They still want their own PSAP. They think they're getting better service. But once the state flips the switch, aren't those calls automatically going to Wickliffe? So what calls are Willowick going to get, or is that not the case? Because I don't understand it.
We would both stay a primary, but we would have a system set up like we already have for the last 30 years.
We already do the rollover thing, so I
We
don't
are
understand
already
why.
But
under
this-
an automatic rollover.
So
But the state decides, and forgive me for a second, I'm trying to understand the process and just be fair to everybody. If the state is once we submit our plan, and again, they could do their own thing, but if they decided to work together, when the state flips the switch, doesn't the state flipping the switch automatically reroute everything to whoever this plan dictates? I mean, Wickliffe and Willowick don't get to say, I want this and this, do they, or don't they? I mean, this is like a legal question of how this thing is written at the state level.
Once the geofence is in place, yes, that's where the calls are going to be routed to whatever PSAP that is. I mean, this is, I don't know, I'm trying to wrap my head around exactly this scenario, but as far as I see, if you combine them, you now have one PSAP. Can you have a PSAP in 2 different buildings? I don't know, I don't have the answer to that. But again, you've got the ability, if one of the W's wants to be the PSAP that gets the geofence, the other W is just the dispatch center that has the EZNet connection, has probably, I assume, a shared phone system or a CAD system, I don't know what they have. Then the ability to send the call over is there. You can get that call over to them. They're just now not a PSAP, they're a dispatch center that is working off of a PSAP that is in the other W.
What we're specifically saying is Willowick keeps their geofence and their PSAP. Wickliffe keeps their geofence and their PSAP. We currently share a radio band, and when our lines are full, when we've maxed out what we can answer, that line then automatically rolls to Wickliffe. And it would stay that way.
It stayed there.
And it actually.
Nothing changes.
Nothing.
If you become PSAPs.
Which
If
we're
you both become
We are
PSAPs.
both ready to be in compliance and are pretty much
Well,
waiting on Motorola.
currently-
under one
nobody's-
geofence, the technology, so if they have enough calls, so let's say the calls are gonna come to Wickliffe. Both of their people are taking calls. The next call in probably roll right to Willowick.
Correct.
Yes.
It automatically will do that.
Automatically does that.
So it doesn't matter if it's a call from Wickliffe or Willowick, it's gonna go to the next available open line.
And I'm looking at the plan.
I'm saying line, but I know this is all,
So I'm looking at well, they're not numbered. I'm looking at the plan that was sent out yesterday. That's the one that was originated in '88 but updated in 2020. And it says Wickliffe City PSAP, and it says Willowick PSAP. What isn't saying the chart is they're not delineated as secondary to each other.
You need to be online.
unfortunately. They're not called out as backing each other up, but what you're saying is instituting backup for each one of those. They have their own geofence, and they would, when one is busy, they'd roll it to the other, and then net we'd have.
So backups exist throughout the county already.
Right.
Correct.
So that will continue. So if you're a PSAP, we're probably gonna want another PSAP to be the backup.
Right.
So if they're one PSAP, they're one geofence, they're gonna have to look at, I mean, if a tornado comes through, well, with Woolwick,
I guess I'm getting
you know,
confused.
they both might be shut down.
Well,
They're
you're
gonna-
saying,
Let me,
you're
I
saying
think I
one.
can clarify this. So let me ask this question. Every dispatch center remains a PSAP. Your question is, or your point that you're making, we should not be required to mandate the two dispatcher rule since we're both working together. We should be allowed sometimes to go with just one dispatcher on duty.
Even 3 between the two.
Is that correct?
I mean,
But you could go lower than 2.
yes,
Yes.
Okay.
we have,
I think
Does that make
I
it
think that
work?
works if both are able to take the original cell calls in this case. If both are invested in the same technology and there's an automatic rollover, then they are functioning as one. If one goes down and there's only one covering those two communities, for example, I would hope that we would want to put something in that where they're developing another backup, so if that one person gets overwhelmed,
yes. that
it's
is
rolling
already-
over to
At minimum, you have
Willoughby
2
or
between.
Central or us or whatever.
And it is already layered.
But I think-
it
Well,
may
it isn't yet
exhaust-
because you're not currently receiving direct 911 calls through the cell service.
Landlines you are.
Yes, no, we all get that.
That's where it's
But
like-
this is different technology.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as long as everyone's invested in that and the ability to accept the call, the original cell calls is in place, then I think that configuration probably does work. But I think that's the whole point here. I mean, we're, you know, if everyone's committed to investing in the technology to get there, if it's seamless, then I think it can work. But again, I would think that we would still need to layer up at some point, because if there's one person now covering two, and it may not be the case. I mean, I know there are times where there are more than one dispatcher on duty in both communities, I'm sure, but having those instances where there's one for two communities, that's a precarious situation.
But is that what you guys are, is that what they're talking? I mean, my
No,
understanding
that's-
is that they both still want to be PSAPs.
Yes.
So Wickliffe PSAP, Willowick PSAP.
Right, I think they'd have to be if we're looking at
Well,
that.
then
Yeah,
if-
that's
dual
but I guess
reliance.
then that goes to you guys' point one, is that if they're both PSAPs, they have to meet the 2 dispatcher requirement for the PSAPs. So in order to waive, I mean, I think I'm getting what you're saying, is that the way they're doing it now is according to the administrative code with 2 and 1. So they're meeting the current standards. It's just you guys' point one, if there's still 2 PSAPs, point one would apply and they'd have to have 2 at each. If they combined together and became the double W, one single PSAP, then that's one PSAP that would require 2, but they would have to merge and not be 2 PSAPs, they'd have to be 1. Everybody in the county is gonna have backups, and we're gonna get to that. It's later down here on page 24. And we're gonna get everybody's backup tree and where these calls are being routed to for all the dedicated PSAPs. So that's coming. Everybody gets a backup. Everybody's calls eventually go somewhere that we're all gonna have agreements on. But if you're a PSAP, according to what you guys said last week and that I put into a point, was that if you're a PSAP, you need a minimum of 2 on.
So if we go with the minimum of 2, and it's aspirational, as you mentioned, right? And I understand the point of best to make this decision now and not kick it down the road, talk about changing it later. If we said the minimum is 2 for our plan, then the folks that are doing this example of separate PSAPs, and sometimes we're only on one. I mean, by saying it's gonna be 2 minimum, then those communities will need to decide either to up staffing over time or to merge into a single PSAP,
Correct.
right?
That's correct.
Yeah.
So
Understood.
you're gonna have one geo fence that's around both cities.
So you know, the discussion we've had a lot is setting, you know, high standard for the county. So if we did 2, then there's gonna be some repercussions and
It would-
stuff people would need to address.
I guess
Over time.
I think the whole point, it would seem, of Next Gen is that the technology we're putting in place should certainly, the standard, to meet the standard, to put new technology in place would certainly make what you're saying seamless or possible. Would be the whole point of it. Technology always gives us more benefit in theory.
Sure.
I never said good benefits.
So do we want to vote to put this on page 24?
I move to.
We've already
I
had.
think we had the
Move
motion.
to adopt.
We need to
the-
vote.
Yep.
Yeah, we did.
Oh,
Any-
that's correct.
Any continued discussion on this or any points of clarification?
If I could maybe clarify, at least from our perspective, or my perspective, excuse me. I always try to speak as a collective, but I am for every community who wants to have a dispatch center having that, as well as the ability to take all of their 911 calls. And I believe that's important. In regards to this addition, this clarification, all I can do is based on our experience of answering all cell phone 911 traffic for Lake County. Each year, we receive about 75,000 911 calls into our center for Lake County from cell phones, not landlines, just from cell phones. It's an average of about 65 911 calls per shift over 8-hour periods, not a 12-hour, because we have 12-hour shifts some places, over an 8-hour period. Sometimes that's 5. Sometimes it's 175. And those come in times of crisis. So if we were able to dictate when those crises came and say, we're going to have all 5 or 6 houses in Fairport catch on fire from the gas lines, and it will occur on February 2nd at 7 o'clock, we could have all our dispatchers available that day. Or when the tornado comes in, or when all the small creeks in Lake County expand because of too much rain and we have the 2004 flood, or we have the train wreck next to Lubrizol. If we could predict those, we could manage staffing, but you can't predict those. And our experience has shown in those moments when you're flooded with 150 or 200 calls all at the same time within a 45-minute period, because everybody wants to call to tell what the problem is, when their electricity's going back on, who's coming to their house, somebody's having a baby, somebody's having a heart attack, and all these calls are coming in. It's difficult to do it with 4 or 8 dispatchers at the same time. In one experience we had during the tornadoes, with 8 dispatchers on and all those calls coming, 70 went into a queue. And what I mean, those are either unanswered calls or hang-ups. When all those calls were initially handled, we had to continue to dispatch fire departments and police departments to handle traffic, fires, and all those. But at the same time, we needed dispatchers to go back and see what those 70 unanswered calls were, call them back, find out if they were answered, if they have an issue. It requires a large amount of staffing. Imagine when that geofence is placed, dispatching is going to have to handle those calls, all those calls when they come in. It's difficult for one dispatcher to do that. I think it's difficult for two dispatchers to do that. When you look at a geographic region, and it's a small geographic area, whether that's 2 miles or 7 miles or 10 miles, when you're looking at that, and you're looking at some of the disasters that could happen, it's not necessarily a house fire. It's a tornado. It is a flood. It is various lacks of power outages across a whole area that eliminate a lot of issues and require a lot of 911 calls coming in. It's difficult to handle that. For me, sitting on this board, based on that experience, I believe it's important, looking for the safety of the community, and that's what we're tasked with as a board, is I believe 2 at a minimum is required. It's not just a guest list. I think based on our experience, 2 is important. Now, some of the ideas that I'm hearing, I think could change over the next 3 years in terms of technology. We're looking at police departments, and fire departments. In Lake County, we have some phenomenal individuals who are managing all these. We have this thing called AI coming in. We don't know, we're starting to use it. We don't know in 2 or 3 years what AI will present for us that will change our abilities to respond to emergencies and all those. The idea that you could have 2 communities and have one PSAP that answers that, so it comes to a PSAP answering point. And the calls go here, there's 2 dispatchers on, so the calls are coming there. When they're overloaded, the calls then go over to this dispatcher. It's like having dispatchers in 2 rooms handling the same PSAP. That could certainly be a possibility, is managing one PSAP. It doesn't say everybody's got to be in the same room to answer those calls. In Washington State, I'm being told, so I read it on the internet, so it's got to be true, that they're talking about having PSAP answering points in people's homes using their laptops. I'm not sure how that technology is possible or whether it is, but certainly this technology could change over the next 3 years, and we need to look at the application of next gen and see how we can best do it. From this point in time, if you were to ask me, my recommendation is 2 based on our experience at this point in time. If in 2 or 3 years things change, then we can change that requirement. I know I've gone on a long time, but just tried to explain my perspective on that.
Anybody else?
I think, while I think that system works today, I agree with one of the sheriff's points, which is that the volume is going to be increasing, and it's going to be increasing significantly because everyone uses cell phones. They don't generally use landlines any longer. And while the configuration that Wickliffe and Willowick are working with could potentially work, I think it's important that wherever a call lands, there has to be 2 people there. So if it's just 1 and 1, while that may work instantly, if one goes down, you're still dealing with 1 person receiving calls for 2 communities. even one person receiving calls for either one community is I think, a challenge.
But according to what you're saying about moving our geofencing to include both of us and that you'd all be happy with that, you're still gonna have one in Willowick and one in Wickliffe and meet the requirement. It's not going to change it.
But if one goes down, if that one person,
You'd still only have one person at Willowick, so
Right.
you'd still only be at 2.
I think he's saying
No,
if
you'd
one
be
of the
at one.
centers physically went down, then you'd be down. So
one person.
Wickliffe
dispatching
goes
for
down,
two
if something
communities.
happens and then you're out, then the person sitting over in Willowick is now responsible for everything by
And the person
themselves.
in Wickliffe would drive the 5 minutes down to Willowick and sit in our room.
No,
That's what we do now. We have all those contingency plans already.
Okay.
We've already been in doing this for
Right.
25, 30
It's not
years, yeah.
broken.
We have all these contingency plans in place. We share a radio band. We can dispatch for each other from anywhere.
So if you have one person in each dispatch center and the one person gets sick, how are they gonna drive to the other location?
Well, currently an officer would come sit at the desk until the dispatcher that got called in gets there. We've had it happen maybe 5 times in the last 30 years, and that dispatcher was in there within 15 minutes.
And
an officer watched the desk.
that's completely non-acceptable under the next gen plan. I mean, you can't have a non-trained
Non-dis-
certified
And then if
dispatcher
you mandated
sitting at
S2 and that
desk.
dispatcher gets sick, you're still back in the same spot. When we could what if this to death, but the reality is we're already in compliance.
But are you satisfied with that potential gap in time?
There's always gonna be a potential for a gap. You don't know what's gonna happen.
Or more importantly, are we as a committee satisfied that that's the standard we want for the county over time?
I guess my thought on this is if any PSAP that's operating with one person has an automatic rollover to a PSAP with 2 or more, that
Right.
would work.
I,
But if it's 1 and 1, I just think there are a lot of potential gaps there, unless there's, another rollover solution there. Maybe there is.
And again, that tree needs to be built. I mean, figure out how and where these,
I mean, there may be a
Where these-
technological solution to that.
but that inherently gives you even more problems. I mean, if dispatch center PSAP A rolls to PSAP B and now PSAP B is also busy, then it rolls to PSAP C, and that's grandma calling because grandpa's having a heart attack, where does that call go and where is it eventually answered and what's the delay as we're going down the line? I think it's a concern.
I would like to circle back to something I'd asked. I direct this comment to the chair, is from a standpoint of we've now spent nearly an hour talking about the first of how many that you have there? And we keep talking about things that are sort of further down the plan. So I guess to sit there, we're stuck on the first point running around and Captain Backnicky said, well, there's a rollover tree and that's later in the plan to talk. Seems to me would be better to move on to the other points and take this in the big picture rather than, because we could sit here, to your point, all day and kind of kick around this one point with other things not being discussed about or sort of dragging them from the bottom up. But I'd be more comfortable if we continued through the list of everything and got the bigger picture and then discussed the merit of this.
In,
I just
in
think-
theory, I would say the rest of the points are less contentious.
Okay.
Again, these are all you guys.
Well, but you're
points
talking about
that
the
I
rollover
relayed.
thing. You're saying that, how are these calls going to flow? I think that's an important component to this.
It is, but as we get there, the rollover tree and how we're going to do the rollovers, the committee has decided to build in time for people to
Well, and I
get
think
that going.
the other thing too, you just said is that what is being presented would it be compliant to next gen? So we're the new standard. So while it would work now, within 5 years, that standard, if it's a PSAP, would have to go away. The protocols that we're using today on the next gen's 911 standard within 5 years would no longer be acceptable.
Yeah, once we switch to next gen and the county turns its switch and connects to the SNet of the state, these requirements have to be fulfilled.
What you're saying about these gaps, okay, so you're saying once we switch to next gen 911, you have 2 dispatchers on duty in our PSAP. that dispatcher's never allowed to go to the bathroom or take a break, otherwise we're not in compliance with that minimum 2 in the room at a time. I mean, how far do we want to go with this?
Right, you know,
Why?
just to maintain
We're not
order,
entitled
but
to
just to
breaks
maintain order,
anymore,
from the audience, with all due respect, we just can't have people yell up without being on record and all that kind of stuff, so, we're just trying to work through this in our minds, and we can get through any, we can come up with any scenario that happens today, but we're just trying to do the safest thing for Lake County. We don't know, we don't have a crystal ball what 5 years from now is gonna bring us. But we need to get the plan, finished and to the cities and to the, municipalities and groups that have to vote on it. So I
Mr.
think at this
Chairman,
point.
we have a motion and a second. I, for one, am comfortable voting on this.
Everybody else? Okay. Go to vote? Mr. McIntosh?
Yes.
Mr. Hillier? Mr. Flippia?
Just before I cast a vote, just for discussion, the idea that a PSAP with one that can roll over to, that automatically rolls over to a PSAP with two, I think would be workable, would it not?
That's what we're voting on, so
But
I
it-
would vote no.
Well, no, we're voting on two in every PSAP.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
I mean, is that, I'm just wondering if that scenario satisfies everybody. That may not work in your case, but it may be, you know, an opportunity to look at a different type of backup scenario. So in other words, maybe, you know, you're looking at a backup to any other PSAP in the county that reliably has two or more.
So this is a vote to say a minimum of 2, and if you're saying you're comfortable without a minimum of 2, then you would be voting no.
Well, this is a vote to put it into the page
minimum
24,
of two
and
to
then
be
we
on
still
page
not
24.
approving the
What
plan.
I think the point of this whole discussion is that to be assured that when a call comes in, there are at least two people available to take that initial call at all times. Not, you know, 1 and 1 with one falls off, then there's only one. My point is if it rolls over to a PSAP with two,
So.
that's the spirit of that, or
The spirit is.
the
so
end result
That
is-
would be
is
one,
satisfying.
that'd be within one geofence, so, like the scenario, it could be in separate rooms.
So you're
Separate
talking
buildings,
about,
so it's not two different PSAPs, not two different geofences we're talking.
I understand, but what Ken's saying is, in the scenario you're talking about is if just, again, Captain, we're talking about Willowick and Wickliffe maintaining one geofence, what Ken's saying is like, if there's an issue, then it rolls over to another PSAP, which wouldn't be those Willoughby.
A PSAP with
county-
at least two.
Yeah, if the county had two or
Telecommunicators.
Willoughby had two.
That's what we're putting on page 24. That's what we're voting to put on page 24.
I don't think that is.
Page 24 is
Well,
saying-
maybe it is. I suppose if it's an automatic rollover, yes.
To another PSAP.
Yeah, okay. Yes.
Yes, okay. Mr. Carr?
Yes.
Sheriff Lane Bruno?
Yes.
And Commissioner Regovich, yes. I hope the other ones go quicker.
Mr. Chairman, I just wanted to make that point, that
Yeah.
there are other ways, if we all understand it the same way.
And I think as we get through this, some of the stuff will be a little bit clearer. And,
Right.
So,
But then that also allows for the opportunity down the road as technology allows, you know, maybe there is a different type of rollover that goes to a third agency immediately, or just, I don't know, we'll figure that out as we go, right? I have a question just to Captain, if I could. So currently you receive all of our current cell calls. What would you estimate as the delay in that dispatch, that call being dispatched under the current system? So in other words, you're getting those calls, your telecommunicators start inputting information, they get transferred to whichever agency in the county. What would you say is the delay, or how much time will we likely pick up by having those cell phone calls come directly?
It's very fast. I mean, honestly.
Less than a minute in most cases?
Oh, God, absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean,
always less than a
yeah,
minute, but
I mean, without
is
a
it
doubt.
30 seconds? Yeah, I mean, just on average, what would you estimate?
The average transfer is 10 to 15 seconds. However, it's a supervised transfer. And what we mean by that, it's not click and I go about my business. Now, hopefully you got that call. It's a supervised transfer. So although the dispatcher transfers it within 10 seconds, stays on the call to make sure the receiving agency gets that call and takes it over. It's a supervised transfer, but it's 10 to 15 seconds is the average transfer of a 911 call at our dispatch center.
Okay. I think that's important because that's essentially what you're picking up by becoming a primary PSAP, is roughly 10 to 15 seconds.
Yeah, eliminating that small delay.
Right.
Can I just ask a question just for clarification for my own purposes? Ken, is your interpretation of that first bullet point that we're talking about that the minimum training standard in your mind is met between the primary and the secondary, or is your understanding of this bullet point that we're talking just that primary PSAP meeting the 2 staffing member requirement?
Well, it has nothing to do with the training, but I think it's just the reception of the call. It would be that every call that comes in is going to be received by a PSAP with 2 people in it.
At the primary PSAP we're talking about. We're not talking about the rollover.
No, it could be the
combination.
rollover. It could roll over to one with 2,
Okay,
but
then
it can't be
maybe-
1 and 1.
Then we need to clarify that because that's not my understanding, and I don't know if that's everyone else's understanding.
This says two. Two is two.
At the, and we would be
That's
talking
right.
about 2 at the primary.
That's right.
Well, I think we just asked that question, didn't we?
Well,
Isn't primary, if it rolls over
vote
automatically,
is
isn't
no,
that
right?
primary?
The primary is the PSAP that's taking that direct 911 call. The Ohio Administrative Code says you can meet that minimum staffing requirement if a primary automatically rolls over to a secondary. But that's already in the OAC, so there's no need to state that. It's the only reason why this committee would be adding something into page 24 is to specifically delineate something above and beyond what is already written into the Ohio Administrative Code or the ORC. If your understanding of this first bullet point is that this is the same requirement that's already set forth in the OAC, then there's no reason to put this into this section. So I just want to make sure before we depart from this topic of conversation that everybody's on the same page.
Well, are we all on the same page?
I am. I think from the discussion, I think your vote probably was intended to be a no, actually. Because I think
Pretty
you're
sure I can
off.
think about my
the
own
rest of us.
votes, but
Yeah.
Rick, can I say something?
if it's an automatic rollover, I think, so there are systems that automatically roll over to multiple agencies. I think Cuyahoga works that way, doesn't it? I mean, don't they have a
So
central
they have
automated
They have
reception
tiers.
point that rolls
They
over?
have tiers laid over from PSAP to PSAP.
But I think every call comes into a central point and it automatically rolls.
They have 23 different.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, but I'm saying I believe that's how their system works.
Well, and honestly, what you're saying is basically what Next Gen is. I mean, all of these calls are going to go to the state and then be routed through the EZNet. So I mean, they're going to go somewhere and then be dispersed out. So it's kind of where we're going with the technology in the EZNet. So the state is just looking for every county to say where do these calls land when the phone rings in Willoughby. So if that's geofence, the EZNet knows to direct it directly to them.
So let's use Willowick and Wickliffe as an example. If, let's say Wickliffe has 1 dispatcher on duty, and they have an automatic rollover to some other community that has 2. We're still requiring, the committee is still requiring all to have 2. Because we're thinking about the current scenario where they exist, where Willowick and Wickliffe currently have this relationship in place, and at times they each have 1. So if there was an automatic rollover to a center, a PSAP that had 2, could be Willoughby, could be Mentor, could be Central,
Right.
that would not,
But will,
That's
I mean, that would, so there was, the question that was the reason I asked the question earlier about interpretation to the secondary rollover. Does that mean a secondary rollover with 2? We would assume that it would be.
that's where I'm, yes.
I mean, again, I would say I don't know that that's necessarily the only interpretation of that. So the statute, or sorry, the Ohio Administrative Code says a minimum of 2 telecommunicators must be on duty and available to receive and process calls at all times. For 911 systems with automatic rollover to a secondary PSAP, the secondary PSAP fulfills this obligation. I think a reasonable interpretation of that would mean you have 1 telecommunicator at the primary PSAP, you have an automatic rollover to a secondary
that has at
PSAP that
least
has
2.
1. I think that can be fulfilled with just 1, because then combined you meet that 2 minimum. I think that's the intent of it. I don't know that that necessarily means that then the secondary PSAP has to have 2, because then that primary PSAP, if they only have 1, they could never be a secondary. So in their situation, they're relying on each other to fulfill the primary. The primary has 1, the secondary has 1. They automatically roll over to each other
And that's
in order
2.
to satisfy that 2 minimum staffing requirement.
And if I can give a little history on, with regards to the change that they made, and it was told to me from the state of Ohio that rule, that modification of the 2 to allow for 1 with backup came from Morgan County in southern Ohio, because they run the whole county on 2 PSAPs and have very minimal calls, and their concern was that if each PSAP has to staff 2 people, Morgan County would be completely broke if they had to staff 2 and 2. So they made this modification basically to the code because of that county. So in my mind, I'm looking at the call volume of Morgan County versus what we see in Lake County, and I wouldn't feel comfortable putting this amendment that they put on, especially because of Morgan County, onto Lake County. Just a little history that I got, a little lesson from them.
Okay, but again, that's not, I don't think anybody here is suggesting that that works here. We just, the 1-in-1 scenario. But what I'm saying is because they rely on each other right now. Again, I know there are times where you have 2 working in that. But in those scenarios where there's 1-in-1, if they had a different arrangement, I'm just saying, let's say Wickliffe now works with Willoughby as a rollover, and they always have 2. That's pretty much instantaneous on a rollover, is it not? I mean, it is effectively the same as the primary receiving point at that
Unless
point.
to where it's rolling over is already busy handling other calls, and then now you're getting into the scenario of rollover to rollover. And
Well, yeah, but I mean, that's the case with all of us, right?
Well, sure, I mean-
Yeah.
could be, depending on the call volume. But again, this point that the committee had brought up last time is
Well,
specific to
I'm
PSAP.
going to suggest, so my vote is still yes, but I think the point I'm trying to make here is that if we agree that in a rollover scenario, that essentially the second PSAP that is accepting that rolled over call is receiving it in pretty much the same, almost real time, essentially at the same time, and they always have 2, I think that could work. So I mean, that may be something to explore as an amendment to this as we go. If we're not willing to look at that right now or incorporate that, then I think that's something to look at. That may not, that they may or may not apply to these 2 communities specifically, but it could apply if different arrangements were made in the county.
I mean, again, though, I would just like to point out, I don't necessarily think that the intent of the OAC is that the secondary PSAP has that minimum of 2. I think the intent of it is the primary has.
Oh, I
1.
understand exactly what you're saying. I understand it. Yeah, I'm just saying that this is a variant of that. That if you had if you're rolling over, if you have 1 dispatcher and you're rolling over to 1 automatically that has 2, you're probably going to be served it just as effectively.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like you to complete your last sentence. You're talking about primary PSAP, secondary PSAP, the intent of the ORC.
I was just talking about the automatic rollover provision. I think the intent of what is listed in the OAC to meet the minimum staffing requirements is that if there's only one telecommunicator at the primary PSAP, the minimum 2 telecommunicator standard can be met by having an automatic rollover to a secondary PSAP that just also has one telecommunicator. I think combined together, they can meet that 2 minimum telecommunicator standard. That's what I believe the intent of that minimum staffing exception is under the OAC.
Okay, thank you.
So this has been, no change, do we move on to our next point? Okay.
Okay, point 2 of what I took from you guys from the last meeting. Any PSAP in Lake County that decides to cease operations shall provide 30-day written notice to the 911 committee of their intentions to abandon the PSAP.
I
Have a
think that's
mo-
reasonable.
Can I have a mo-
Correct word.
Can I have a motion?
I don't think
Is-
SEIS is
Did I-
I don't think that word's.
CEASC.
Yeah, C, that's just a typo.
Can I have a motion and a second for this?
I move.
Discussion?
Were you second, Ken?
Yeah, discussion on that. Is
Discussion.
30 days enough?
I was thinking the
I
same
mean,
thing.
if Willoughby decides that they're not gonna dispatch anymore or take calls anymore, that's gonna be a big burden on somebody
Everybody.
else. There's gonna be costs associated with that
Put it
that'll
all over
have to
the
be
mender.
negotiated. No, but I'm saying there's a lot that goes into that.
Absolutely.
There's gonna be a question of financial responsibility, ability to take it,
just
staffing.
if
I
you
just
had to-
don't think 30 days is long enough.
If somebody had to add equipment to take up that slack, I mean, we all know how long we're waiting for everything. Fire apparatus is 2
Staffing.
years. But I mean, yeah, I had the same thought as 30 days long enough. I don't know. I mean, because realistically, if an alternate center had to spin up another desk or something, it's not going to happen.
It's gonna be a while.
It's going to take some time.
So I think 30 days notice is to come before this body, right? Is that our intent of that? And then we could probably put this body can meet and say, okay, when's the timeline? to
Right.
Do that. Is that our
Yeah,
intent?
I
That's a
suppose
note-
the 30 days would be, sorry, I got too
It's
close.
not saying a closing and that it decides to cease the operations. It doesn't, I mean, is it implied that there would, in theory, could close within 30 days, or it's just a notice that they, at
Probably
some
30
point?
days to convene the committee, give you guys notice that, hey, we need to have a meeting.
But it's
Here's our
not,
30
it's
days.
not actually shutting down in 30 days.
I think the PSAP would have to decide. I would think they would know way before they made the decision.
Yeah, there's a difference
to give
between
notice.
making notice and then saying how long they would have for that.
I think we would need to clarify that. What
Yeah.
is the time period the board thinks is reasonable? Is it 6 months? Is it 3 months? And put that language into the 30-day. Because this is a rule that says the day you cease operations cannot be sooner than 30 days from your notice.
Yeah, there needs to be a longer window
You
there.
could write a 30-day written notice to the committee, follow with a 180-day minimum. of,
Shutdown, yeah.
If that's reasonable. I don't know what's reasonable. There's a lot to this.
I mean, you could make it more fluid than that and actually just give the 30 days to provide notice to the 911 committee, put in there that a hearing shall be scheduled before the committee within whatever amount of time to discuss the timeline for the PSAP to cease operations. That way you're not committing to a specific time frame. It's gonna be flexible and it's gonna change based on the PSAP. A larger PSAP might need more time, smaller PSAP might not need, but that way you have some flexibility. That'd be my recommendation.
That makes a lot of sense
I
to me.
like that.
So we could,
Good question. Sheriff, if a PSAP goes out of business, let's just say, do you, under revised code, nobody else picks that up by contract, are you obligated to do that at that point? Just wondering if, say, hey, we're out, who gets it? If nobody else steps up and says, well, we can work under that arrangement, do you automatically get that?
If no
What's the
one's going to
arrangement?
do that, we would certainly step in to do that. There would certainly be requirements that we may or may not need to extend. We have the ability right now to do that because we're doing it.
We're committed.
So we would step in, but certainly it would not be assumed by the Lake County Sheriff's Office Dispatch Center that anybody who ceases operations, that we then take over their operations. Does that make sense? It's not assumed, but we would.
I'm just wondering if there's a fallback is my question.
Well, are
It's
you
like
asking if the law requires the sheriff, if nobody else does it, you're saying
Yeah,
is the
let's
state law
say,
required?
you know,
that?
whatever, it doesn't, I'm not mentioning any community. If a
Right.
community in Lake County decides they're getting out, they can't make they can't make an arrangement with another, whether it's, you know,
I would
Who
think
gets
they'd
it?
want to make that arrangements because
well,
there's
they're gonna
costs
want to,
involved.
but what if there's disagreement on that? I'm
Doesn't it
saying there's-
default to the state automatic, or to the county
Well,
automatically?
that's my question.
That's what he's
Is
asking.
is there a automatic
Yes.
default?
Okay, well then
Yes.
that's your automatic default. right
Okay,
there.
well, that was,
Another unfunded mandate.
We would
Maybe.
then go
Maybe.
to, we would then go to Jason Boyd and ask him for more money.
Wow, there's a new one. So
we're out,
we
Sheriff.
we could adopt this to the page 24 with the amended language that Nina provided and will provide.
Are we, yeah, do we have that? I thought her approach was responsible.
I mean, if you guys are comfortable with allowing me some time to provide that to the captain to put in, you guys can just provisionally or just temporarily approve it, subject to my
Revision.
additions, and you can take a look at it.
I'm comfortable with that.
Mr. Chairman, I make that motion.
Second.
We already have a motion and a second, so now we need to vote on it.
Did we have a, well, we didn't have a motion to include her language. We had the motion, but we needed, do we need to vote on the original one, vote it down,
Vote
and
on
then
the
have a new
amended.
motion to add the language?
Yeah.
Because the first motion didn't have that language included.
Well, I think we need to
Vote
be
it,
specific on the motion.
well, don't we need to vote the current one down because it doesn't have the alternative language and then do a new motion with the,
This is just to put it on the sheet.
well,
Or,
who's our
or,
parliamentarian?
or the person can withdraw the motion.
Mr. Chairman, I move to withdraw my motion and move to adopt the new language into page 24.
Second.
All right. Mr. McIntosh,
Yes.
Mr. Hillier,
Yay.
Mr. Flippia,
Yes.
Mr. Carr, Sheriff Lane Bruno,
Yes.
and Commissioner Rangovich, yes. All right, next.
All right, point 3, any dispatch center choosing to remain in operation in any capacity without a functioning PSAP will maintain the ability to receive transfers of 911 calls and associated data.
I move to adopt.
Second.
Any discussion?
So this is the Madison Township, or anybody else who would choose to do the same?
Correct, yes.
Okay.
Go to vote. Mr. McIntosh,
Yes.
Mr. Hillier,
Yay.
Mr. Flippia,
Yes.
Mr. Carr,
Yes.
Sheriff Lane Bruno.
Yes.
Commissioner Rangovich, yes.
Moving on to point 4, any PSAP operating within Lake County agrees to accurately report financial expenditures to the state of Ohio per the Revenue and Expenditures DAS form on an annual basis.
I move to adopt.
Second discussion. What's a DAS form?
Department of Administrative Services. Every year I collect all the data from the PSAPs called the Revenue and Expenditures Form and compile that and send it to the state on a summary form, so they have the financials of every PSAP in the county.
The state requires that now, correct?
They do, yes, every year.
Is there any, I'm just asking, whatever number you give them, it is what it is, and there's no looking into it?
We've had that question last meeting. I've made some phone calls, we got some feedback. They all stand by their number, and, you know, other than each city gets audited every year. So there's no reason for us to question that number any further, I think. So if they're willing to report it to the state, then that's the number we're gonna have to go with. I think.
Okay,
And I don't question it, they send it to me and I transpose it onto the final summary form and send it to the state. The state does do a check and then gets back to me to make sure everything was square on their end compared to mine and the PSAP, so there's checks and balances.
okay.
Okay. Go to vote. Mr. McIntosh.
Yes.
Mr. Hillier.
Yay.
Mr. Flippia.
Yes.
Mr. Carr.
Yes.
Sheriff Lane Bruno.
Yes.
Commissioner Ragovich, yes.
Point 5, misdirected calls will be transferred to the proper PSAP via supervised transfer discrepancies. In call routing will be reported to the county 911 coordinator for reconciliation per 1280788.
I move to accept or adopt.
Second.
Discussion.
What, just for background, we're adding this because it's not delineated per what?
It's not, the main aspect that we're looking at here is the supervised transfer. The sheriff pointed it out earlier, as opposed to just hitting the transfer button and sending a misrouted call to another PSAP. We want to require that the dispatcher stays on the line to make sure that that connection is made from PSAP to PSAP.
It's not clearly defined as we need to enhance that. It's not in the ORC or it's not.
It's not. I mean, it's just something that I think is,
Sorry, real quick. So the Ohio Revised Code just says that the final plan shall designate how each emergency service provider will respond to a misdirected call. So I think this.
So we need to
probably
call it
complies
out.
with that,
Okay.
giving those details.
Any more discussion? Go to vote. Mr. McIntosh.
Yes.
Mr. Hillier.
Yay.
Mr. Flippia.
Yes.
Mr. Carr.
Yes.
Sheriff Lane Bruno.
Yes.
Commissioner Ragovich, yes.
all right, point 6, prior to implementation of the county Next Gen 911, all PSAPs will report to the 911 coordinator their desired backup PSAPs for rollover 911 calls. Which basically goes back to the backups, the tree that we had talked about earlier. Again, we've got a little time here, so kind of puts in the rule that everybody's got to report who they're going to, because obviously that has to go to the state through the EZNet. So
So this is, each PSAP will have another PSAP back them up. Essentially, that tree, so.
I move to adopt.
Second.
Discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
so I didn't read the complete Cuyahoga report, but I was told, informed it was rather in-depth. Does it need to just go for the one backup, or do you, I mean, I'm asking because I just don't know. Is identifying the single backup acceptable? And then thinking of the case of the tornado that came through in 1974 when I was a kid, and I thought it landed in Wickliffe on Ridge Road, and I heard from people in Wilwick it landed in their neighborhood, so I know it was everywhere. If they're all taken out, does it need to go any further?
I think so. I mean, I don't think it hurts to have backup to backup to backup and figure out what we're doing just for those particular cases. So, I mean, if we can have a primary backup and then a secondary backup and then see where the call goes. Again, we don't want to lose this thing into the backup tree.
So that, I mean, that being said, if you have a primary backup and they're busy, let's say with the same scenario, that automatically goes to their backup, which would be the secondary backup. Is it?
Correct, yeah, I mean, it would just follow along.
Well, if two communities reciprocated, then you're in a circle and you never get out of it.
Right.
That's the fear.
Well, to answer your question, Mr. Hillier, the Cuyahoga plan does require primary and secondary backups,
All right.
and a whole list of redundant activities that have to take place between or among them. So
So,
like annual testing and things like, what they have to do to maintain that same level of consistent service.
so I'm not the expert here. I'm just a panel member trying to understand it. I'm asking the experts, is a single backup in the case of two communities who reciprocate backup, now you're stuck in a circle, and if a tornado hits both communities or a disaster hits both communities, do you need to have a backup? And if you tell me we don't, okay, I'm asking the question.
My opinion, I would say, why not? I mean, if we're
Yeah.
aiming for a good plan and safety of the citizens in the county, people have time to get this done. Let's get us a second backup. First backup to your backup, two backups.
On the
Actually,
on the advice of the 911 coordinator, I withdraw my motion to accept and change my motion to accept the last line with the addition of requiring two PSAP or two backups to be named by each PSAP.
So doesn't this kind of take care of the staffing then? We're already doing this. We've got this, we've got backups, Millwick and Wickliffe, it's been working. Right now, if you're saying, which I agree with, have another because we could have our two lines, Wickliffe's two lines could be busy, our two lines could be busy. It's got to roll over, right? So again, playing the what if game. So to me, this is more important than the minimum two staff. I don't understand why you had to go over Ohio Revised Code when right here solves that problem. Definitely with us, or at least you could put an amendment in that first one for communities that are already doing this. We have everything in
this
place,
is-
we're already backing up.
Yeah, this is
So-
within the geofence, so it's each PSAP. And if you look county or statewide, a lot of counties have just one PSAP. So they gotta go to another county for a backup. So we're just saying that, we require it, if you're gonna be a PSAP, that you have to give us your backup tree, which is
Right, I
gonna
get
be.
And per the amendment, we're saying,
Mayor, under the rules as defined so far, the PSAP is requiring that a secondary PSAP with a minimum of two dispatchers be on, and then the third PSAP roll over to a PSAP with a minimum of two dispatchers on at all times. That's, under these rules, that's how that would work, and that's my motion.
So, Sheriff, you're suggesting we change that language to primary and secondary?
That's correct.
each
You
having
need to
two.
name two.
I think if you remove the word desire from that sentence and add the words primary and secondary, that
That's correct.
satisfies what we're after. Yeah.
So currently, the Lake County Sheriff's Office backup is the city of Mentor. We might then say if that is not working, as an example, just to throw one out, that Willoughby would be our third rollover.
So my question is, the way the language is written right there, it's PSAPs as in plural. So do we really want to change it to primary and secondary, or do we leave it as plural and let Captain Vacnicki work with the PSAPs, because maybe it ends up being primary, secondary, and tertiary?
Good
But
point.
PSAPs, to me, plural, leaves it kind of open for the captain to work with the PSAPs to determine that to whatever level. Could be 4 levels.
Good point.
So I guess the way I interpret that, PSAPs being plural, is is fine. But I don't know what the rest of you feel like.
I think it needs to be clarified.
Yeah.
It says,
I like primary and secondary.
yeah, and that's the
And
backup.
I understand what you're saying, and I appreciate that. I just think when you have a primary backup, there's a lot of coordination between those two that may be perhaps less less of a lesser relationship, let's just say, with that secondary backup.
I just want to be clear on how we're going to be using the term primary, because the primary PSAP is that first PSAP that's receiving the 911 call, and then the secondary PSAP is the rollover. So why you could say, one option would say each PSAP shall designate at least 2 backups, a secondary rollover, automatic rollover, and then a third backup. You
So
could
do
say
we-
something like that to clarify if you guys want to have the
Do we want to
two.
say separate PSAPs in that? Do we
You
want to
could
say
say
one?
each PSAP shall identify.
Another.
You could say, well,
A
you're
secondary.
just worried that the terms would get confused.
Right, we can't talk about a
How
primary
about first
backup
point to
because-
rollover, second point to rollover? I mean, something like that. But I mean,
I like this, the wording of minimum
first
of
backup, second
secondary,
backup.
tertiary, or two other backups, but the language of minimum, which leaves it, if you want to develop a plan, Captain, with further levels, that's fine. But we have at least 2 levels of backup. Maybe
A
that's one you,
minimum.
maybe that's one you can work on finalizing the language a little bit.
We could do that.
We got it. Yeah, we'll reword that. I'll get with Nina and we'll clean that up, but the premise is there.
Okay, we have a motion and ready for a vote? Mr. McIntosh?
Did you get a second?
Yeah, McIntosh. It's the amended.
But what is it? Can we someone try to
I'm gonna
alliterate it, please?
have Nina say it.
Each PSAP shall designate a minimum of 2 backup PSAPs. That's going to be the gist of it. That's going to be the intent of that amendment, and we can flush out the language of that. But if that's what everybody is comfortable with, that each PSAP needs to identify 2 backups.
Okay.
We good?
Yeah, and I mean, again, I don't think that word desire should be anywhere near that sentence, because I mean they have to be in place. But
Take out
shall
desire.
designate is better.
We'll
yeah.
take out desire.
Well, no, I think what was mentioned, each PSAP shall designate a minimum of 2 backup call receivers, or whatever the terms we're using.
Oh, call receivers better than
Precepts.
desired, huh? Okay.
Yeah, whatever.
Rip on my words.
Good to vote? Mr. McIntosh?
Yes.
Mr. Hillier?
Yay.
Mr. Flippia?
Yes.
Mr. Carr?
Yes.
Sheriff Lane Bruno?
Yes.
Commissioner Regovich, yes. Okay, those are the 6 we had?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
So there was one more I brought up last week. I didn't think it got knocked off the list, but I don't see it up there, so if that's all we have, I want to throw the other one back on the table again for discussion. I raised my understanding of this committee was that whatever we send off to the state becomes the plan, and then it gets voted on by all the local municipalities, communities, and then that vote is taken. If it's adopted, it goes off to the state. The concern that I had, or my further understanding was that once that process was completed, this committee by itself can alter this plan in any manner. And the one thing that I wanted to see restricted was the ability of this committee to eliminate PSAPs without cause. And I didn't say without cause at the last meeting, but I think if this committee down the road, and we could be 6 different people sitting here, then that committee could eliminate PSAPs if what was stated at the very first meeting is true, because there seemed to be some disagreement on that with home rule and communities. So if I'm a community and I have a PSAP and I vote on it and and it gets adopted by the county, then I would like to see the same formal process take place 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road. This committee can still recommend to eliminate PSAPs if that's legally allowed, which there was still question on it, but then it would still have to go back to the county, I mean, the individual communities, to vote on it, and then they could stop that from happening. The one point that was made is that if there was a PSAP currently under the plan that was failing and causing the county in its entirety to lose the state funding because they were failing to comply, then this committee would have the authority to eliminate them. And under those guidelines, if they failed to correct it, and under that, I understand the reasoning for it, and it makes sense, but without cause, I disagree. So I would like that to be considered, however you can condense that in there, unless, of course, the board disagrees. I'd like to see it for a vote, if nothing else. I fully support that position.
Do we want to put that up for a vote, or do you want to discuss?
Are we talking about, I'm not clear on what the ask is here. Are we asking for something else to be added on this page
Yes.
24?
Yes.
Yeah, so at the meeting, and I'm not sure if you were here last meeting, Bob, but,
No.
so the last meeting, there was a concern raised to me, to Morgan and I. We visited the majority of the local centers, and there was an individual who raised a concern of specifically what I stated. This board could eliminate PSAPs after it's approved by the county in its entirety, meaning the communities, and then it's sent off to the state. And so now we'll say we have 7 PSAPs, 8 PSAPs, whatever the number is. Down the road, they could all be eliminated but one. Theoretically, under the guise of the voting of the authority of this panel, this committee, if I have that correct. So to prevent that from happening without a vote of all the communities, and again, without cause is what I'm specifically looking for, because somebody down the road, a group of committee members who could all be different, deem it to be more efficient, whatever the logic they so choose. I would like to see the same formal process take place to remove any PSAP from,
So what's the 1 or 2 sentence summary of what you want to put on page 24?
If I can just interject real quick, I don't believe that there is any authority within the Ohio Revised Code as it currently is written that would give this 911 Review Committee the authority to just adopt an amendment to the plan that doesn't have to go back out to vote of the political subdivisions to do what you're suggesting, to just unilaterally decide to remove a PSAP because for whatever reason. I don't believe that authority exists. There is a statute that is addressing amendment to the final plan, and there are certain things that can be amended by 2/3 vote of the committee, certain things that can be amended just by a majority of the review committee. Removal of a PSAP is not addressed in there, so I do believe if there was going to be a unilateral decision from the 911 Review Committee to remove a PSAP, that amendment would have to go back to a vote of the people. Again, though, that is not specifically addressed in the Ohio Revised Code currently. We don't know what's going to happen in the future, though, because statutes get changed all the time. So if that is something that this board is concerned about, a future interpretation of law or a change to the law, and you want to make sure that each community retains some sort of autonomy with regard to their PSAP and that they can't just have their PSAP closed because this committee decides to do that, then that would be something you'd want to outline in this final plan to give further clarity about those situations, what the requirements are. I know last week it was also discussed, well, what's the appropriate remedy in a situation if you have a PSAP that is continually non-compliant with the technical rules and requirements? What would be the ability of the committee? So that's an option where you can put something into this plan if it's a situation where there's a PSAP that just can't get in compliance, it's gone through the whole state process for compliance and still isn't complying. In order to not lose funding to the entire county, perhaps that's a situation that you'd want to give this committee the authority to amend to the final plan to remove that PSAP without going back to a vote. So those are some of the areas for discussion.
well, it's good to hear.
So-
Then we, Ms. Flip, I'm sorry. So the first point in regards to my original request, it sounds like it's not an option. That was presented to us, I think, at the very first meeting that we had back in early October, and that just didn't sit right. So that's why I raised that. Now you raise another point, and that's important.
Well,
Well, sorry, go ahead.
The authority has to exist, otherwise we wouldn't be able to remove those that are voluntary in nature.
I
So, I think you were saying is that our plan should outline the conditions that exist where this committee can remove or can't remove, and then that will go to a vote of the
Correct.
community.
Right, and that way there's no question about it, there's no statutory interpretation fights that are gonna happen later because the final plan will explicitly state what those conditions are, and that will have already been approved by the people, again, assuming that gets approved. But I think, Chuck, what you're talking about was when this committee first met, just the discussion about designating the PSAPs in the final plan. So setting forth in this initial final plan which entities are going to operate as a PSAP is a different concept than once you have this final plan approved, this committee then later changing that plan to eliminate a PSAP.
Okay.
Two slightly different concepts.
My apparent misunderstanding, thank you for clarifying.
So, why don't we hold off on why don't we craft some better language then? Because we would want to include a provision that gave us the ability to remove a community at their request. We've already adopted a rule on that, 5 minutes ago. But also we would have to have some conditions of there have to be some threshold of non-compliance too. So in other words, if, somebody in the room misses a training, one person didn't get trained and the coordinator says, hey, you're missing that, well, you're out of compliance, you're out. I mean, it can't be that. There has to be, I think we have to give some thought to the level of non-compliance to the point where it's actually threatening the county's funding.
And there is an OAC section that
Yeah.
talks about the rules enforcement, and there's a pretty robust process that the PSAP would have to go through to answer to the state 911 coordinator. Time would be given for them to get into compliance, so it would have to be a pretty bad situation of continuing pattern of non-compliance in order for the county.
Agree. I think it's exactly what I'm saying. So I think we need, if we're gonna try to craft some language in this plan that outlines the conditions that have to exist for us to remove a PSAP, then we probably need to give some thought to that language before we,
Do we need to do that if it exists?
But it doesn't exist within the Ohio Revised Code or the Ohio Administrative Code. It's not specifically addressed within that. What is addressed is if a PSAP is non-compliant, then it states that the entire funding for the county can actually be suspended. And it specifically says in the OAC that the funding suspension is for the entire county, as the county has sufficient authority to compel compliance at the local PSAP. So they're putting that back on each county to designate what they're going to do in these situations, but it'd have to be in the final plan. The only other option defaults back to the Ohio Revised Code, where it says that the Ohio Attorney General or the prosecutor, upon their own initiative, can take legal action to enforce compliance. I think we'd prefer not to have to do that if we could have something that everybody agrees upon set forth in the final plan that goes to vote of the political subdivisions. That way everybody's on the same page, there's clarity. I think that'd probably be the best option.
Any further discussion?
Well, what would be the next? I mean, I think Mr. Flibiak was correct. I think we ought to give that a little bit of, that might need a bit of work.
I mean, I think your general thought on it is worth including. I just think we need to be, because it's more than just that. We haven't given ourselves the authority to remove anybody or not remove anybody. We just need to clarify what the process is.
Let me just get from all of you what your thoughts are on the matter, and then I can draft some proposed language to present to this committee in advance of the next meeting for everybody to consider. So if the general thought is we are going to work towards possibly putting something in this plan to make it specific that this committee does not have the ability to just remove a PSAP on its own, it would be limited to situations of continuous, serious non-compliance that threatens county funding, then the board can meet. Is that kind of the?
Or
Yeah.
voluntary. I think Ken's brought up voluntary. If somebody
Yeah.
came in and said, we're going to shut
Right.
down.
Which that would fall
kind of
under the earlier
covered that.
point
Yeah.
of the ceasing operations, so we could do that. So that's kind of where this where the thought of this committee is heading. I can put something-
Repetitive or egregious non-compliance, something like that.
Right, that would- I
And
understand,
the
right.
ability to do it for,
Right.
upon request.
Which
But then
we do
that-
have that.
Well, no, it gives us the terms, but it doesn't give us the authority to actually do it. It says we have.
Well,
to
I
do-
was going to flush that part out.
Yeah,
to
but I mean, I
have
think it
that
needs to
yeah.
be stated. so.
Right, I agree.
I think the comment about the possible threat to funding is an important attribute, because that's come up before.
I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
that section, you know, that condition can include funding is discontinued because of the lack of compliance. You know, that can be,
But I don't know
that can be a, you know, an event, a triggering event, for
Yeah,
example.
I'm not sure we control that, though. I think the state will give it each PSAP their funding directly.
But I think what we would be stating is that this committee would have the ability to make that determination of removing a PSAP if the funding to the entire county is threatened.
Yeah, it's
or
a whole county funding thing,
Yeah,
right?
that-
It's
oh,
not
yeah,
just,
it's-
yeah.
It's-
Right, so if one PSAP causes the county to lose funding even temporarily, then that would be a triggering event potentially. So I think we're gonna get there, Chuck, we just gotta figure out, that needs to be quite specific, because every community that's gonna vote on this is gonna be looking at that and saying, okay, I need to know what the terms are, and I would wanna know that as well. Yeah.
So where do we, so we probably aren't prepared to put that on page 24 until we see the wording?
Correct.
Right.
Okay.
Is that everything? That's it.
Anybody else to add?
Can I ask a question for the record, please?
Yeah, I'll open it
Is
up
it-
to.
All right, thank you. So this, we got 5 years to implement this plan once it gets approved by other municipalities, correct?
Yeah,
5 years, and then you guys meet once a year. The committee is required to meet once a year? Minimum once a year, okay. So if after it passes, and you have your meeting next year, Wycliffe and Willowick got together with something, with the plan, we came to you with the plan to see how it's working, would that be something that we'd be able to get an amendment to that first bullet point with the staffing? If we can show what we're doing?
I'm sure we'd be open to any of that, right? To meet and see any of those type of plans.
I mean, the plan can be amended
That's, I mean.
pretty much at
that-
any point.
Right.
We're
Well, we just-
required to meet once, what is it?
We're
once
required,
a-
but we can
every
meet
s-
more often.
Every March.
Right,
Yeah, so every
Once-
March we have to meet,
right.
but we can meet, if
Although,
Willoughby wants to make some major changes, they can say, hey, I want to do it at a different timeline, then would certainly seek the board.
so, actually, the mayor brought up a point that we haven't circled back around to, which we talked about very early on, which was, we have 5 years. Do we want to take 5 years? Or do we want to do this earlier? What's our time, what timeline are we thinking about?
I think it took 5 years to get past point 1.
Well, and that's kind of.
Feels like it.
Kind of what I was gonna say. I
I mean-
mean, there's a laundry list of steps to get us moved into next gen through the state. The first step is to have a final plan completed. So if we get to that point, my next step is basically a form that raises your hand that tells the state that you have everything. There's still time for GIS to get all the data in and the layers, so they gotta get that all to the state. They've got about 1.5 years, I believe, left to get that to the state. So there is time, and I think it would be, once we started checking some of these boxes down this checklist, probably get with the committee and figure out when we want to get in line to get this going.
What, am I wrong in seeing that we basically are outlining a plan now, and what the mayor's asking about is 12 months from now, potentially, or within 12 months, potentially an amendment to that? A
Yeah, I'm
change.
just circling back to the broader point.
Which we
is
just sort of
how-
talked about
How
is-
quickly do we want to be next gen
Right.
compliant?
It's up to you guys. I mean, once we
Right,
start, yeah,
which is-
checking down the
It
boxes.
is, right, that's
Yeah.
why.
I look
we-
at it might be, how much time do you need to get all those other things?
And I think we gotta touch base with the PSAPs. I mean, again, a lot of them are waiting on equipment, firewalls and stuff to get these things to the point where they can connect, so, probably give it some time and then we'll assess and figure out where we are and what we can do to get connected.
I'd like us to get that evaluation at some point, though, before we put a final timeline on it, because I know, like, in some cases, I think with the county, I know with us, Willoughby's buying new equipment. I think our equipment just needs to be upgraded in order to do it, but
Right.
that was, I think Sheriff had mentioned at one point, or maybe it was you, Captain, that the equipment that we have is probably good for a few years or maybe a little longer or something.
Yeah, Mentor and us, we just need a few little tweaks to
But
it.
if it's 5 years down the line, we may not even be talking about the upgrade
Right.
is a point. And we maybe, in other communities, might be looking at a whole different set of hardware as well as software if
Gotta
we're
order
5
it.
years out versus 2 years out.
Right.
I mean, I would hope that our goal here would be to get next gen compliant as quickly as possible. I don't know that it's, to anyone's benefit to wait 5 years just because we have 5
No,
years.
I completely agree. I mean, once we're there and everybody's ready, I think we should go. I mean, I don't want to push that back till the next required meeting. I mean, everybody's going to need time. I mean, potentially next March when we meet to see where everybody is and if they've got the equipment. And I mean, that gets us a little bit closer and figure out where everybody's at.
Don't we have to give them we don't have to give them a timeline, or do we?
We do basically, but it's,
I know the max is 5 years.
yeah, I mean, there's still some testing at the state. And again, they say 5 years, they're still certifying some of these systems.
Maybe a while to get
They're
around to
probably
Lake
not
County
even completely
too.
ready either, so I mean,
Right.
we gotta wait, they haven't certified everything,
Right.
so.
So it's kind of premature to be putting a number on it.
Okay, so I guess next steps would be to let's book her another meeting if we can, another meeting, so we can keep this rolling and get this the wording that Nina is going to put together, and then hopefully we can wrap this up and get it to the cities and municipalities that need to vote on this.
Mr. Chairman, is that the next step would be to finalize this wording on the page 24? And would
Sounds like we have
this
one-
next meeting be the?
It sounds like we have one
We
point.
can vote on the whole plan?
I hope so. And then, but it sounds like we have one point we want to put on. I'm not sure we're ready to do a timeline yet. And I think, if we want to get to, a June 30th, some communities have summer break. So I want to get it to them as fast as possible because they're only going to have 2 meetings probably in June, if that many. One? See? So we want to make sure we can get this and back to the state before their next meeting, so I don't have to go in front of them again and get scolded.
Mr. Chairman, question for you.
Yes.
In regards to the discussion we had on the backup and then the backup of the backup, does that need to be included in this plan? Or is that addressed elsewhere in another document as part of this process where,
I think we're going to put in this plan.
I think you should do an appendix with a chart that lists
That's what
all the
Cuyahoga
primary
does.
systems, yeah.
Yeah.
Who's gonna be
But
secondary.
will that happen I'm assuming so they're going to come and say, I want to be our own PSAT. And here's my backup, here's the, are we going to require that from each PSAP so I don't know that we know that appendix or that chart yet.
Yeah, I don't think we do. I mean, I think once we get the final plan, we establish how many PSAPs we're gonna have in the county, and then, once everybody knows they're a PSAP, they can start talking and getting MOUs or understandings of who's gonna back up who. So I think we put in the premise that we require 1 and 2, and then we'll give them time to get together and iron that out.
Yeah. Is that acceptable, Nina?
Yeah, that sounds fine.
Okay. Okay, so I have a preliminary date of June 2nd at 1 o'clock. That's a Monday. Does that work for everybody?
I cannot be.
Sheriff cannot be.
I cannot be.
I'm out of town.
So what I'll do then is put some backup dates out to you, hopefully by the end of today, that we can pick one.
Well, why don't we pick one right now? What about Monday?
What's that?
What about Monday?
26th,
Yes.
Memorial Day.
Okay, so you're off, so you can be here. Tuesday,
Tuesday's good.
I have a trustee meeting in the morning.
Tuesday afternoon.
I have a medical appointment, I'm sorry. I guess I could cancel it if I had to.
Wednesday.
Wednesday morning?
I have 2 meetings Wednesday morning. Sorry.
Wednesday afternoon.
I'm not free till after 2. No, till 2. I could probably make 2 work.
3 o'clock on Wednesday, the 28th?
And you said 2 you could do.
Yeah, I can.
2
3, 3's fine. Well, appointment ends at 1:30, so I might be coming in pretty hot at 2, but yeah.
Well, it took me 15 minutes to find a parking place, so we might want to look at 3.
All right, I can live with that.
Had to drive past all those reserved empty spaces before I
Commissioner
found
Beveridge loves when you
last-
park in a spot. So Wednesday at 2?
2:30, Morgan?
2:30?
2:30 is fine.
Just safe. 2?
The 28th, 2 p.m.
I thought we said 2:30.
That's what I meant.
Okay.
2:30?
I'm good with that. Sheriff?
Yes.
Bob, you good?
Yes.
All right. That being said, I'm going to call this meeting over.